Wonderful. Thank you everyone for being here. We're just going to do a quick round of intros and then we'll get going. My name is Rebecca Warren. I am relatively new to Sift in month 3. I'm the director of product marketing, so it may be a new face for you all today. Excited to be here hosting my first webinar with Dr. Sean Costigan. A little bit about me. I have experience in cybersecurity, DevOps, and computer networking over about 8 years. Really focused on how can we take new products to market in early stage to Series B startups. So Sean, I'm so excited to be hosting this one with you. You have such impressive credentials. Not only are you the director of cyber policy here at Sift, you're also a professor at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies and a NATO Serge Lazareff Prize winner. So much more to all the work you do, but really thrilled to be here with you today.
Well, thanks so much, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be with you, and to learn from you too. You've got a great deal of experience in this space, so this is an opportunity for us to talk all together, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for that.
Yes.
We can let me just add one more bit here. Not that this is the Sean show, and it shouldn't be, but that in addition to the various work that I do there that you've seen on this, I'm the lead for the cyber lessons learned for NATO's DEEP initiative with regard to Ukraine. And so I'm going to be peopling and, sort of putting through a variety of different experiences and lessons learned that I can, and just sort of generate them throughout the discussion so we can have a little bit about what's happening in Ukraine and make it timely. So there you go. Thanks,
Wonderful. Rebecca. I'm really excited. Just a couple quick housekeeping reminders for the audience. This is a Q&A with Sean. We do have a couple questions and slides pre-baked, of course, to help people follow along, but we would love for this to be as interactive as possible. If you have questions you want answered by Sean or things to add on to what we're talking about at that moment, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. You don't have to wait until the end. We want this to hear from you and make sure you're getting value out of the 60 minutes you're choosing to spend with us. We're so grateful you're here. So please join us and be part of this conversation. With that, Sean, we are getting an hour of people's time. Why are we here? Not in the, to quote you, not in the existential way, but what's different about this webinar and why should people be excited for what we're going to cover in the next 60 minutes?
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, we're, post-pandemic or, wherever we are in the world right now, we do have to be answering, the basic question, why are we asking 60 minutes for your time? Why are you here for 60 minutes to work with us and think through what cyber resilience looks like? So there are a variety of answers, but what it really comes down to, the biggest and the most important thing is change, right? The change that's here in cybersecurity. You could look at it negatively and say that, we've done not too well in cybersecurity for quite some time, but I'm going to flip it around a little bit and just think about some of the change and the positive changes that we've seen with regard to AI, which has caught people's imagination and attention, the digital transformation, all the things that are on the slide here that is catching people's attention now, as we all recognize that our businesses and our organizations are in jeopardy in some ways, when it comes to dealing with some of the changes that we see, changes to the attack surface, right? The number of devices that are on the internet or available in cyberspace continues to grow. We promised that we weren't going to talk too much about fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So let's, just be very finely pointed about this. There's definitely an issue with regard to understaffing and burnout in cybersecurity. So that's one of the reasons that we need to be thinking about cyber resilience. Again, what that looks like, and we'll talk about that in greater detail. We also know that some of the automated remediation plans and the efforts that we've been putting into cyber for a while are getting to be less effective. Another topic. And then finally, this is, I promise we won't get in greater detail about fear, uncertainty, and doubt here, but AI as being taken advantage of by innovators, particularly in the cybercrime space. And we need to just be very careful to think about that, because cyber criminals are rational actors. They know how to use it to their advantage. They're going to take the full advantage of the things that are in front of them. So that means making cyber attacks cheaper, faster, and at least with regard to phishing enterprises and the varieties of things that depend on language, almost perfect in their language. And so all those that's the ferment, that's the ecosystem in the space that we're dealing with right now. So to answer your question in short, it's change, right? And that we're recognizing we need to be dealing with cyber and cyber resilience in a way that's very different from it was in the past.
Yes, I'm really excited about these last two, Sean. I think in my career, I've done webinars on digital transformation. I've done webinars on kind of how do you handle that understaffing and burnout in cybersecurity. But I think these last two in particular are super interesting and are creating a different conversation about cybersecurity today than we've had before. I am just going to take 1 second and brag about Sean, since Sean won't brag about Sean. And just kind of tee up that the AI conversation we're going to have today is not, this, the way I used to think about AI, which was that I better be nice to my Roomba or else the robot overlords will take over. Sean is very much an expert on AI, how it can be used, not only by attackers, but also by defenders. And we're going to be bringing that to light throughout our conversation today, as well as how it plays into GRC. After this webinar, definitely check out this article from Sean in Dark Reading that was published last week. But just want to preface, this isn't kind of the buzzword-driven AI conversation. We're really leveraging expertise as we bring that into our conversation about cyber resilience. So
Thanks, Rebecca. Can I linger on this for one quick second and just say there's also again, not to be a Pollyanna about this, but there's a unique opportunity here, and this article I think draws our attention to it, which is this alignment of government, industry, academics, and policy people who are thinking about AI together. So you mentioned your Roomba not wanting to train it to do anything but kill dust bunnies. The reality is that we're all thinking about it right now. That's our active ecosystem, and this is a good opportunity. It's not always the case that we've been in an advantageous spot as we are right now with regard to changes in information and communications technology. In the past, it had been a variety of things. We'll get into that in greater detail in the conversation today, but that's the bit. And meanwhile, of course, the cyber criminals are innovating, and that's part of a driver for why we're having our discussion today. So thanks.
All right, so Sean, let's start talking about cyber resilience. I think cyber resilience is one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot in our space. I know you and I were talking about conferences with cyber resilience in the title, new marketing sites with cyber resilience in the title, but it isn't something that's universally understood. So really quick, no need to belabor this when we only have 60 minutes together, but let's just level set. Can you give us a quick definition on cyber resilience so we're all working from the same paper for the rest of today's session?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right, Rebecca. I mean, it gets used and abused. It's a buzzword, right? And that may be why many people are here, right? We're hoping to try and answer it. The other bit here is I can tell you by definition what it's not, right? So a definition by exclusion, it's not luck, right? The cyber resilience is not the same thing as cyber luck, right? If you're counting on luck, you're in trouble, right? It's not going to work, for you, not repeatedly at least. And if it does, please get back to us because we want to figure out what brand of luck you're smoking, because that's pretty impressive. Reality is, it's not luck. So don't just add cyber in front of it and think, you're going to get away with being able to have something that isn't cyber resilience, right? And so what is it? And we have a definition in our next slide, and we'll talk about that in greater detail. But this is a definition that many of you will be familiar with. At least it will rhyme with many of the things that you have been thinking about in your organization, or things that you're familiar with through frameworks or through large organizations that have come up with these, like NIST. So organizations' ability to anticipate, respond to, and recover from cyber attacks while continuing to operate effectively. So at Red Sift, and the thing that my research has been looking at is the last bit is perhaps the most important, continuing to operate effectively. I'd also want to just concentrate very briefly on anticipate, right? And anticipate to me also encodes a bit of prevention, right? The ability for you to imagine the future, right? The ability for you to think about what may be coming also means that you will be wanting to have the imagination to figure out what prevention looks like in this space. So anticipate is crucial, as well as this last clause there, continuing to operate effectively. If you can, so we could spend all day talking about just this one definition. We could probably spend a year. You might be able to get a PhD figuring out what the definition of it is. The reality is that's not what we're doing here today. We're going to try and get some practical examples and talk through together, and maybe learn from you as well what resilience looks like to you in your organization. So that's our level set. Perfect.
I know we're not going to belabor this, Sean. I'm just going to call out one thing I love about this framing of cyber resilience is historically, I think cybersecurity conversations, especially at the board level and executive levels, have focused on kind of the core metric of whose fault is this, or retroactively looking back at breaches after they happen. I love that this tees up security teams to have conversations proactively to address threats or risks before they turn into true threats, and seems to me to be such an opportunity for a true culture shift in how we think about cybersecurity. So with that, Sean, this term cyber resilience has been everywhere. I think just doing research for this webinar, on Monday, the U.S. Department of Education announced new cyber resilience grants. DHS did the same thing the next day, and of course, MITRE launched its cyber resilience framework in February. Why is this everywhere?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. I think, for those who've been working on cyber resilience or thinking about resilience, they may feel that this is a moment where this is where they can come out and shine, where finally people are paying attention. The reality is resilience has been around for a while. I think what's unique here is, there are several factors that have come together. So first, the headlines. You're right. Headlines are replete with various discussions of resilience, what that means in various environments, particularly national security discussions at the federal level, as well as in some of the large organizations. Then, some of the drivers here, right? Relentless cyber attacks. We know this. We're all accustomed to it. We've been, unfortunately, we're awash in relentless cyber attacks. We also know that risk transfer hasn't worked, right? For organizations of all sorts, we attempted various forms of risk transfer, which might have included things like using cyber insurance, right? Cyber insurance has a role to play, don't get me wrong. However, transferring it and hoping that cybersecurity as a problem would go away by just having a cyber insurance policy has not worked categorically, right? Class actions have grown, right? Class action lawsuits have grown, as well as responsibility for the decisions that are being made in cybersecurity all the way up to the C-suite, right? And the board. And so you see some of the regulations that have changed there too. So we in another discussion, we might talk about some of the changes that have happened with regard to the SEC rules and regulations around cybersecurity, right? And so it's a combination of factors, and perhaps the most important is maturity, right? And the maturity of the cybersecurity discussion has also changed. We're at a point where for 20 plus years since the idea of cybersecurity being and cyberspace being its own domain, we are now to a point where we recognize this isn't something that's a one-off, right? And it's taken quite a while. Many people on this call will come to appreciate that they've been having these discussions, perhaps with their board, their C-suite, with others in their organization, and how to align their interests with the business operations side of the house for quite some time. And it's difficult, but if we think about the maturity, right? And we'll go all the way back to 2012 in this quote, and we'll look at, FBI Director Robert Mueller saying, there are only these two types of organizations, right, that really blend into one category: companies that have been hacked and will be hacked again. So 2012, right? We're over a decade since then, right now, and I think that has come home as a major recognition that this isn't something that goes away. It's something that we have to deal with. How do we become resilient, and how do we get to the point where we're able to remain operationally effective in adverse conditions? That's the long answer. So several pieces come together here.
Yes. And Sean, I think something that's sticking out to me with this quote that you just walked through is a customer conversation I had last week. And it's not even companies that have been hacked and will be hacked again. I think we're almost seeing another iteration to this, which I think is complementary, which is companies that have been hacked and know it, and companies that have been hacked and don't. Not to, bring in another governmental quote here with Donald Rumsfeld, unknown unknowns and known knowns. But, they were talking about phishing sites that were being spun up, and they weren't the ones to find it. It was customers relaying to franchisees who relate to legal, who relate to cybersecurity about these sites. And so to me, I think this really highlights that this is no longer, as you talked about, like that distributed risk. This is now an organizational wide problem. And the only way to get our arms around it is holistically working as a team to try to conquer these challenges. So
yeah, it's operating in uncertainty,
right.
Rebecca. I mean, that's the key bit. I mean, Rumsfeld, aside, it's just we operate in uncertainty, and we're going to talk about some of the practical steps of what resilience looks like in the recognition that we do operate in uncertainty. That there's another bit to it, which, it's easy to give a throwaway and just say, there's all this uncertainty out there. There is, but there's also prioritization. and there's a way to work through very basic steps. Some of them are very basic and get a little bit more complicated as you move along, but some of the basic steps that get you out of the worst of the problems. So yeah, interesting.
So in that vein of prioritization, Sean, security leaders obviously have a ton on their plates. And I worry that cyber resilience can feel like, oh my gosh, it's one more thing for me to think about as a security leader. I don't view cyber resilience that way, but I would be interested to get your take on what's the relationship between cyber resilience and risk management, as well as all the other strategic initiatives security leaders are thinking about today.
Yeah, okay, that's an excellent question. So, everything starts with risk management from my perspective, right? That we really need to situate cyber in risk management. For a long time, in the early days, cyber sort of sat aside. It was the thing that was handled by technical people almost exclusively, and not to belittle any of the efforts or begrudge them those efforts. The reality is that there's a recognition now that there's the GRC side, to use that phrase, the governance, risk, and compliance side of it that's come into a factor. There are a variety of different elements that have come together to mature our understanding. But so we now understand that cyber has meaningful business level impacts. That's axiomatic at this point. So at the heart of all these processes are a set of frameworks for cyber resilience, including the one that we'll be describing today. And they all have to be situated in risk management. So with risk management policies in place, we know that when things can go wrong, at least we have an idea of what we're supposed to do. Risk management also sheds light on the roles and the responsibilities, what to protect, at what level, and more. And that's what we're going to be discussing as portion of our cyber resilience side of it. So Gary Cohn once said, and this is a great quote, another one, if you don't invest in risk management, it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in, it's a risky business, right? Very crucial. And that goes for, it's a good explanatory quote for those of you who are in the position of having to explain why investments need to be placed in cyber, what you need to do in cyber. And so go back to your board, go back to your C-suite, et cetera, and give them this as an idea. So you want to stay out of being in a risky business. And so the quick sort of 15-second is it's all about risk management. And if we can situate it and such, I think we'll be in a much better position globally and together. So thanks.
Yes. The only risky business I want to be involved in, Sean, is the Tom Cruise movie. But
really?
That's on the scope of today's session. So with that, we've kind of talked at a high level about why this is important, why it's suddenly in the cultural conversation and how it ties into initiatives. Right. I'm happy we got through that quickly because now we can spend a lot of time focused on these practical steps. I know that was kind of what you and I really wanted to drive home in this webinar was, we don't want just another white paper. Like, let's talk to people about how this actually comes to life. So how do I, as a security leader, build a cyber resilience strategy in my organization?
Right. So back to definition by exclusion. The one thing you want to do is don't do it in a silo. Right. And we'll talk about breaking down silos in this slide in a moment. So it can't happen in a silo, it won't be effective. And we know this because we've seen, various efforts, right? Again, this is about maturing the conversation and understanding that there have been efforts to build cyber resilience strategies that aren't working cross-departmentally, that aren't working with the C-suite, that aren't leveraging people, processes, and tools. Right, the old way of thinking of things largely was about silos as well. And so even this slide indicates this idea that we had people, processes, and tools. They seem to be in separate boxes. That's not what we want, right? What we want now is a new way, right? That is still cognizant of the roles that people play. We'll discuss that in further detail, the processes and the necessities of these processes, and then some of the tools. But the blending of these things and the dotted lines between them is a much more powerful and effective way. And then lastly on this slide, the big advantage we kicked off, Rebecca, when we were talking about this to begin with, about AI and data and the changes that are underway. So that fits neatly in tools. However, there are advantages that follow through all the way to how AI can be used to take better care of your crucial cybersecurity team and the risk managers that you have inside of so AI can help de-stress essentially a lot of the work that's being done. So that's the new way that I'd like us to focus on. So the old way is not wrong, right? Those are evergreen for a variety of reasons, right? It's always going to be about people, process, and tools. However, this new way that we're going to offer and some of the steps to it may assist us. So Yeah,
Yes.
that's the
I
answer.
don't
I'm sticking to it.
I don't want to steal your thunder for later in our Q&A. But I think this idea of leveraging people and processes together to reduce that burnout that we talked about earlier is key. And I think we've seen that come to life in a lot of different areas of the business, but I'm really excited to hear how you talk about that from a security perspective. And Sean, I know some of the research you mentioned earlier around Russia and Ukraine have seen this brought to life in
Right.
reality, IRL.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Thanks for raising that. I think, you could paint it this way, and you wouldn't be wrong to do so. But so Ukraine, one of the lessons learned that I can offer here is that they definitely have thought of a new way of dealing with cyber, right? And that's through adversity, of course, and having to deal with a variety of problems that they've dealt with for over a decade now. It's not just the last year of the hot war, but they've thought about it very smartly in a variety of ways that include things like eliminating silos to the extent that's possible. So flattening your organizations, sharing across organizations, being able to anticipate because of the information sharing that you do across the people and across the through processes that are clear as well. And then on top of it, the notion of having organizations, as I mentioned, that are flatter and younger, right, than perhaps what Russia has put up in this instance. So you could paint it and you wouldn't be wrong and say Russia's held to old ways of dealing with things. That's true. More importantly, how the defenders have dealt with things, and they've also dealt with things very smartly by making investments in tools and techniques and processes and technologies together that really enable them to be some of the world's best cyber defenders. And we're seeing that all play out in real time right now. So if you're not paying attention to what's happening in Ukraine, it could be understood, right? That's fine. However, what happens in Ukraine will affect everything with regard to cybersecurity going forward, because it's unfortunately for the Ukrainians, it's a testing ground, right, for many of the things that we will see and some of the things that we'd like to not see happen in cybersecurity. So, yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So, Sean, let's talk about how to take those learnings that you just discussed and bring them to life in a security organization that really blends people and process together.
Yeah. Okay. That's absolutely great. So one of the things that I love to talk about is security culture, or just culture in general, right? Think about it as an anthropologist would have thought of it, right? So an anthropologist would say, she'd say it's about the people, and it's right about technology. It's about tools and a variety of things together. So our first stop in this journey would be to build a no blame culture, right? A no blame culture is a conversation that I have with a lot of my colleagues. Really looks at how do you make sure that the training that you do, particularly the things that we spend a lot of time talking about, securing the weakest link. We've made a lot of noise about how humans make errors, and we've made a lot of good decisions at the same time, right, about how to build guardrails around humans. It's not all been done properly, but at least it's a start. We've made mistakes along the way at the same time, and I'd want to just linger for a moment on this, right? That the sort of gotcha training that we spend a lot of time doing, where we, send phishing links to people and we tell them, oh, you made a mistake there. Sean, you're a real dummy. You did the wrong thing again. And we keep, hitting them over the head with this stuff. Got to stop that. Why? Because that is going to create a culture where people will be afraid to tell you when they see that there's something wrong, or when they've made a mistake themselves, and they will make mistakes. So that's our first bit. So second bit is to encourage transparency. So what does that look like? Again, as I mentioned in the previous example, if we make a mistake or they see some other sort of mistake happen in the company, they should be able to describe what that looks like. And if you ensure that there's transparency, or at least encourage it in the organization, I think you get to a much safer spot in general. The analogy here, or by analogy, you look at the airline industry, or air in general. Look at how much safer it's gotten over the years, right? We're not even close to where it could be. And that is an industry that's dependent both on people and on technology. And that's also about being able to ensure that should there be a problem, they describe what that problem is. And if they made a problem themselves, they're able to talk about it. So all of that is non-punitive, and that builds that no blame culture that I think will get us into a much better space. People are really, the most resilient thing you have in your organization at the end of the day. And they're the ones who are going to be there to pick up when your organization suffers what could be a breach of magnitude, or it might be something that's light, but it's really people. So focus on that. You'll do everybody a great service. And you flagged this, Rebecca, earlier. So if your staff can see an issue, it's likely that your adversaries can see that same issue as well. Very important to imagine. That's the attacker's eye view that we talk about very often at RedSift and elsewhere in my career. So
definitely, I love this one. I think when I was working in DevOps and DevSecOps, one of the pieces that has made that such a cultural shift beyond just a job function is this idea of the blameless culture in the blameless postmortem. It's when something goes wrong, it's not what happened, it's why did it happen? Okay, someone clicked a link they weren't supposed to. Why did that happen? Oh, we didn't have the right controls in place. Well, why is that? Oh, because we hadn't invested in this as an organizational priority. And it's always through the lens of this collective we, never the individual. I think this is definitely taking root as we start looking towards DevSecOps. I would love to hear from security leaders that are on this call, how they are bringing this to life in their cultures and their organizations. I think this is really gaining traction in security, and I'm so excited to see where it goes because it ties into how you can be proactive. If your team's the first to recognize threats, you don't have to worry about bad actors finding them. You can adapt before it turns into a true threat. So I love this one. I could do a whole webinar on this. We won't do that. We'll save that for another time. Yep. But Sean, I think it's important to talk about how this culture piece ties into what else is happening at a people level in a security organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're going to go to the next slide here. So we know that we have this major deficit, right? It's a number that we're all familiar with. It's always north of 3 million, in my experience, right? People who should be working in cybersecurity that we don't presently have working in cybersecurity. And why is that? Because we haven't grown that talent. We haven't grown that talent pool nearly to the extent that, and this number hasn't really reduced, for quite some time. It continues to grow, if anything else. And that is despite, varieties of efforts to grow the talent pool. So first thing I'd say is you want to retain the people you have. It's very expensive to spin up people in cybersecurity. It's expensive to find them. And so you want to treat them with, the utmost respect and dignity. And there's varieties of ways that we're going to describe with regard to even how AI might assist in that regard. So so retain your talent pool, grow the people that you have. Right. And also, if you have the opportunity, help the colleges, the community colleges, the universities in your area build the next pipeline of people that you'll be hiring from. So that's all possible. It's the deficit, though, that we're digging out of. Got to invest in people here as a first start.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. So how does that, people and process aren't silos, I guess, to go back to our previous slide. So how do you bring these people into your process?
Yeah, well, at a high level, at our highest level, and this is what this slide depicts, is really the alignment with business objectives. And, the people are the basis for all this analysis, right, that happens. And the people are also the basis by which you become a more secure and resilient organization. But, so looked at with regard to the business objectives, how you become more cyber resilient, you've got to prioritize, use that word earlier, right? And that's smart, right? That's a very smart term here. Prioritization comes through recognition of what your crown jewels are to begin with. What are the things that you need to know, right, to be able to continue to operate and serve your customers and your partners? If you can't answer that, you're in trouble already. So you have to answer that, right, as a starting point. And then what outcomes will this drive for your business? Obviously, there are varieties of outcomes that are very clear, right? And they have to do with minimized financial losses. They have enhanced reputation and trust. Meeting regulatory compliance, making a competitive advantage. If we just think about the financial loss of it for a moment, we have a slide where we'll depict some of that, but the reduction, right, of the time deficit, really meeting the need to be able to satisfy in a timely manner the requirements for dealing with a cybersecurity breach or a threat. They're very significant. It's well known. So there's an ROI already in the investment when it comes to being able to reduce the time that it takes for you to be able to deal with a cyber breach. Enhancing reputation and trust. It's very easy to lose trust and it's very hard to regain it. So let's just talk about that and linger on that for a moment. You don't want to waste, right, the goodwill and the trust that people have put into your organization, whatever your organization is. That means you don't want to have to win it back either. Winning back comes at a cost, and there's research there. So back to what you need to do. Meeting with regulatory compliance. We started off by saying it's changing, right? There's a changing regulatory landscape, and meeting with that. Also, there's an ROI. We've done a lot of research on this at Red Sift in my short time here. We've talked to various experts who've said, it could be as much as 5 to 1, right? To meeting with regulatory compliance instead of treating it as a threat to your organization's success. And then obviously competitive advantage. So retaining your employees, right? Using AI in a way that's advantageous to you, building a book, basically of business objectives that meet with your reliance processes. All of that will speak to a competitive advantage that we'll get into in greater detail.
Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. Here we go. The heart of the matter.
The process slide.
The process slide. Absolutely. We're all familiar with the process slide. And Rebecca, you may have some thoughts on this before I jump into it, but you want to go
Yes.
first, or you?
Yeah, I'll do the preview. Been seeing Oppenheimer and Barbie last week, so now I'm all back in the mode of previews. So this is, I think, the practical 5 steps we can get where people and process work together to drive us towards those business outcomes that Sean was talking about. Sean will walk you through this in much more detail and kind of talk about how this compares to other pieces in the work. But each step here is so deeply intertwined with the people that you're working with, not only on your security team, but across your organization, that this can't just be thought of as, okay, well, here are the 5 steps me and maybe my team are going to do. It's cross-functionally, how do we as an organization focus our efforts around cyber resilience and communicate about that effectively? Sean, you want to get into the heart of the matter?
No, that's right. Yeah. I think first of all, there's a cycle for a reason, right? It's continuous, and that's the first thing that we want to get at. So, okay, we recognize, at Red Sift that, there are many variations and many frameworks. There's Gartner's CTEM, there's NIST 5 pillars. There's any number of the frameworks that you might have already chosen or be working with in your organization. That's fine. The key bit here is that is alignment in approaches that are around very similar risk management concepts. And we also recognize that it's a continuous cycle. As I say, there's no such thing any longer as one and done. So increasingly large, cumbersome sort of cross-departmental initiatives have been broken up into multiple parallel projects. And that's sort of the agility that we want to talk about in some detail here. So time, as I've underlined a few different times throughout this, time is the new currency, right? And as such, our approach is broken down into these 5 steps, right? That's focus, it's action plan, it's verify, prioritize, and remediate. These are all things that you might be able to use. If you take a look at what happened in Ukraine, and we discussed this very briefly earlier. So when an old, larger superpower had taken advantage or attempted to take advantage of a more nimble, innovative, flatter organizational structure, and largely the investments in technology and a variety of the other steps that are encoded here have come to play. So, all right. Let's break this down to its steps. So with focus, the first bit is the process can be scoped on an attack surface. So that's external facing assets, could be your cloud assets. It could be also your threat vectors, could be lookalike domains or insecure emails, or it could be by business application. That's right. With regard to action plan, I'm going to rip through this quickly, and I hope we have time for Q&A on this. We note that while many cybersecurity approaches make the last step in their effort to fix or to recover, action plan for us is remediation that's best considered shortly after you've scoped the project. Right? That's very helpful for scenario planning, for identifying key stakeholders to involve in the process, gaining organizational alignment on the timelines and the resources, and prioritizing. So it's really imperative to begin with the end in mind. Right? What's the end and it's resilience that you're after. Step 3 for us is verify, so that once a team has scoped the iteration of their cyber resilience process and worked cross-functionally to agree on what to do with their stakeholders, they need to verify that remediated exposures, risks, or threats are the best investment of resources, including time. Crucial, right? So is it genuinely exploitable? Is it genuinely exploitable? I'll say it again, right? What are the attack paths? Are they likely to be exploited? Step 4 is to prioritize, and that's once the issues have been validated, right? That's the security team can then begin to prioritize them. And then in short, you have to remember that risks that are in scope that have a business impact, that have a significant business impact are likely to be the top of mind when it comes to being able to deal with them, and then you remediate. So those are our 5 steps, right? Remember that remediation doesn't begin and end with patching critical vulnerabilities. So however you do these, and the order with which you do them is also important, but pick at it and use this process. Be very curious to hear how we do it throughout your organizations. So thanks.
Yes.
Yep.
I certainly would as well. Feel free to drop that in the chat. I think one of the things I love about this process, Sean, is even as someone that's in a related world of marketing, there's so many lessons here for how you solve problems. I think this first step of focus, as someone that's come into a new job within the last couple of months, it's so easy to try to get a hold of everything. And I think a lot of the frameworks that are, out in the world focus on discovery as this first step, and go and discover all of your external facing assets and every threat vector out there. But that project that's just driven by discovering every potential vulnerability and risk and threat can just die in quicksand because it can't be moved forward. So I think
discovery fatigue.
Exactly.
Right.
So really focusing within your team and cross-functionally, around what is the biggest risk to our business, using knowledge, using new vulnerabilities that have come out in the world, and focusing so that you can move through this and make process and deliver value to your business very quickly is critical. Like going and discovering everything out under the sun can no longer be the first step of security initiatives. The other part of this, I guess, I'm going to say the other part a couple more times because there's a lot of this that I love. The second part of this that I love is action planning. We talk about this internally here at Sift. It's, if you discover that you have an exact domain impersonation problem, and organizationally you decide, well, we're not going to do anything about that. We're only going to get to P equals none, which is of course not what we would recommend at Sift. Don't start that project. Go and align with stakeholders on what you can do to take action before you start to verify, prioritize, and remediate. Make sure that your stakeholders that you're working with across the board are aligned on the time and resources it's going to take from their team to actually implement this remediation. Because if they're not, there's no point in going through all of these steps. So like you said, begin with the end in mind. Where are we trying to go? And make sure the people you're working with are aligned with that. And then with verify, I think I read a study 2 weeks ago that said 85% of issues in a security backlog can't actually be exploited. So once you've focused an action plan, make sure that there is going to actually be impact here to your business. It goes back to your previous slide of what's the outcome we are driving. And then, wow, what an easy way to elevate that conversation across your organization, because you're no longer in the technical, you're talking about the outcomes you're going to drive for your business, which is, a much better way to engage even up to the board level, as we all know. And I'm sure you can talk about more as we go through this presentation. But I think there's a lot here. I think it's mostly kind of remixing how those steps have been put together previously so that it can be focused on outcomes, it can be focused on risk management, and it can be focused on efficiency and remediation for the people that are burnt out and constrained and have a very little amount of time to focus on each one of these issues. What I missed, Sean? Anything? Nope. I kind of wanted to diatribe about why I love this process, but
great.
If there are questions on this, feel free to drop those in the chat or the Q&A, or we can come back to it at the end. But I think this is a lot of the meat of what we are going to cover today, Sean, but let's talk about kind of how we can amplify this with AI and data. We talked about these two things have to be bidirectional. They cannot be living in these separate silos. How can you amplify this process with AI and data across your security team and across your organization?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. If we let's concentrate very briefly on reducing stress. We know that stress in your organizations, right, on your security teams in particular, is a #1 reason for them to leave their jobs and move on elsewhere. So first bit is orchestrating automation with AI should eliminate some of the drudgery, right? We're looking to figure out a way to eliminate drudgery. So leverage AI for what it's good at, right? Identifying anomalies, automating time-consuming tasks. We can give an example of web certificates, for example, or security certificates in general. So thinking back on Ukraine and its dependency on Starlink. So Starlink went down because of an expired certificate problem, or a certificate problem that ultimately could have been, I think, remediated, understood, and detected, right, by some automation. Wasn't done, and a rather significant outage occurs. All right, that's just one example. So leverage AI for that. You want to reduce, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of time that a breach it takes to detect a breach and deal with it, right? And some IBM research that we have here. If you have taken advantage of automation, you've taken advantage of AI, you see that 108 days shorter compared to organizations that have not deployed these technologies. That's a very significant amount of money, given especially that any of these breaches can cost as low as $15,000 if you're a tiny organization to over $1 million. These numbers are ginormous, and then that doesn't take into account the class action lawsuits if you're a publicly traded company that you might be able to unfortunately be in the sights for. So there are a variety of different changes here, and then automating repetitive tasks. It's just a very basic thing. See if you can do that. See if you can find technologies. It doesn't matter necessarily where they come from, but it does help your security team to free up resources, to gain a time advantage, and also just prioritize. So that's what I'd say with regard to this slide. If we can move to the next one. I'm
going to actually add one thing, Sean. And I'm going to do the marketing red Sift plug just this once. This is my only plug here. But one of the conversations I had with a customer or prospect last week was around this leveraging AI for what AI is great at. Their team historically had tried to go through the process of thinking of domains that looked like theirs or look-alike domains that could then be utilized by a bad actor to set up a phishing site. I would argue, and what this company was arguing is like, that's not a great use of the security team's time and thinking power. So I think that's just one way that Sift is really leveraging AI and ML is taking that off of the plate of the security team, using AI to think in that way, identify domains that could be impersonating yours, or also looking at all of the certificates that your team is responsible for. And that way that cognitive load is off of your team, so they can spend their time doing things that drive value for your business.
That's right. So yeah, that's a great phrase, cognitive load. I mean, that's the best way to think about it that I've heard in a long time. So I absolutely agree with you, Rebecca.
All right, that's my one Sift plug. Thanks for bearing with me through that, Sean. So in that, so we've talked in theory, we've talked in process. Let's talk about what it looks like in the real world. What does cyber resilience look like in the real world, and what should all the folks that are here on this live session aim for when it comes to cyber resilience?
Right. Okay. We have a list of some companies here, and those who've been involved in cybersecurity for a long time, or who've just studied it, are going to look at these 4 companies and say, Sean, you clearly lost your mind. You're giving examples of major breaches, not necessarily of cyber resilience. And what I'm going to do is turn around and tell you that in each one of these instances, right, all of these are major breaches. Some of them led to class action lawsuits. Many, some of them led to billions, and not millions, but billions of dollars in payouts. You have the basis of a company that recognized that investments in cybersecurity required more than just one-offs, that they required ultimately cross-team efforts all the way up to the C-suites. So each one of these companies has done very well after a breach. So post-breach, post pain and suffering, right? You get to a point where all these 4 examples that I'm going to give you. So, you think about Equifax for a moment. That's affected more than 147 million Americans, right? They ended up paying billions of dollars in fines and settlements, right? But that results, right, in at the end of the day, better features with regard to their cybersecurity posture. I'm not suggesting, right, by looking at these, and I want you to just take this home. I'm not suggesting that the only path, right, to get to cyber resilience is through pain and suffering and misery on the scale that we're dealing with here, right? You don't want to think about it that way. What you want to do, however, is recognize that there are models. That's the point here. They're models to study. So if you look at how these companies have put together their teams, the hiring of new CISOs, the hiring of people ultimately who have responsibility and authority to deal with cybersecurity. So yesterday I was reflecting on this with a colleague of mine who says it's very important for us to recognize that, while you can delegate responsibility, you can't delegate authority. And that ties all the way to how some of the cyber regulatory rules are coming down the pike. So if you look at what's happening with the SEC rules, just very briefly, think about those and think about the responsibility and the authority that is invested in your board and in your C-suite with regard to cybersecurity. You'll get a picture for what the future should look like cross-departmentally, but also cross-functionally for your organization. So look at these models not as, not just what not to do, but rather what to do. And I think you'll be in better shape. They're also all large companies. And that I'm going to give you some examples of what small entities might be able to do as well in a moment.
And I'm going to go off script here and ask a question that you just sparked in my mind. You talked about how these organizations have built back their security programs after the incident. Your expertise of is varied and wide, but I think one of the things you've taught me so much about is GRC and cybersecurity. So this may take some hypothesizing on your end, but how do you bring this GRC component into rebuilding for cyber resilience, or how have organizations like the ones on this slide done that?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Rebecca. It's crucial. It's all right. So the first bit is, as we talked about early on, technical. While cybersecurity being a technical field largely has been, one of the gaps that we've been dealing with as people think about cyber and how they're supposed to imagine a better way of dealing with the cybersecurity risks that we face. So the GRC side of it enters into the discussion at the point where people are now looking at it saying that the deficit has been to think about where does governance, risk, and compliance fit together. So all of these companies imagined the GRC because they were exposed to it, right? Side of it very, very abruptly and very painfully they were exposed to it. But nonetheless, they've reimagined, how to deal with. That's your risk managers. That's your legal department, right? That's HR. That's every one of the components that have to do with your operational success have some cybersecurity responsibilities. And that's what we'll see here. And we carry those lessons through to some of the smaller organizations as well. It's not just the large organizations that feel the need to do GRC. However, let me just underline this. GRC is in alignment largely with the regulatory environments that we see changing. So we led off this discussion by talking about changing regulatory. Don't operate like you're a 20th century business any longer. You really have to see, if you're going to do that, you're going to end up in trouble ultimately with, the catch up that has happened in the regulatory space. So that's the short of it. I mean, we could spend another hour.
Could do another webinar. Yes.
We probably should do another just on GRC. But lastly, I'd say, so, I was involved in the last couple of days, like reimagining what the U.S. federal government has made major investments, and you talked about some of that a bit with regard to education and cybersecurity in the United States. And there, almost all the courses, the efforts that I'm seeing there start off with a GRC component before they get into the ones and zeros, just to give the technical people, if nothing else, the taste that this isn't simply about dealing with the latest patches. This isn't about dangling DNS or any of the specificities that they might be involved in, right? And not to negate that, but just widen the tent, as it were.
Widen the aperture into those business outcomes. Okay. Thanks for indulging me on that one, Sean. Let's talk about another great company to learn from, which was Sony.
2014. Yeah, great. I mean, we can do this very briefly, but Sony again. Study the tapes, as it were. Look at what happened here, right? So Sony made a variety of mistakes very early on, and they imagined that they were going to get through it, sort of suffer through the breach. They went back to their BlackBerries. They dug out fax machines. They hoped that all of that would cobble together a plan that they'd be able to survive. What became really one of the most significant breaches that a company in the United States had suffered. And so Sony is a case study, both what not to do, but another one of what to do. So, these are some steps, very basic steps any size organization can do. And Sony has figured these out. So write down a plan, right? Review your plan, update it, practice it, make it muscle memory. All these things, making it muscle memory are key, right? You really want to know. A colleague of mine years ago put it down to one very basic question. He said, do you know who to call when something goes wrong? And if you don't, right, if you don't know who to call when something goes wrong, you don't have a plan, right? You really don't. So start off there. That's the essence of the beginning of resilience, right? Is knowing who to call, and then, right, go through these steps until you got it to a point where you can do something about it. Making a muscle memory also involves, and Rebecca and I, we talked about this a bit, tabletop exercises can help a great deal here. And we see some success, some companies offering those for various levels of the organizations that they deal with. But I think tabletop exercises are especially rich when it comes to dealing with and being able to practice with your board in a way that's, not a great deal of time. The board is obviously busy doing other things for your entity. They're not all going to become cybersecurity experts, but they'll be able to understand what it looks like when they have a problem. And that's where a tabletop exercise can really help. So then they'll know who to call. They'll know what to do. And finally, I just offer, you rightly flagged, Rebecca, that there are some free kits out there, free tools that are out there. Use the things that government has been offering, because some of those will get you out of harm's way, right? At least the bulk of harm's way. Not everything, but some, right? And if we move to the next slide, I know we're going to give a positive
Sorry, Sean, I'm going to
example.
add one thing here, which is
okay.
Sean and I were chatting before the webinar. I'm doing triathlons, and one of the big mantras in triathlon is nothing new on race day. And that's what I read when I look at this slide, and I think should be a mantra for cybersecurity, right? It's nothing new on race day, nothing new. When that incident happens, it should be that muscle memory, as you say. You've gone through it enough times, you know who to call, you know who to get involved, you know how to manage up and across the organization. And it's just become a part of your team's DNA. It's not struggling through a new process while also dealing with immense amounts of stress. So that's my only thing there. So Sean, let's talk about, you mentioned activating the C-suite.
Right, nothing new on game day, but activating the C-suite. I've peppered the discussion a bit on this idea that we really should be activating our C-suite. It's one of the best things that we have when regard to cybersecurity. It's a way to help ensure investment, right, in cyber as well for your organization. Just keep them involved. But this is a really positive example that occurred just recently, and it may be an example of where things will head in the future as well. We may see more organizations, more CEOs who want to get hands-on in the way that this CEO did. So his name is Werner Lanthaler. He rushed to his office after learning that his company, this biotech company called Evotech, had been hacked. And this, as I say, may become an example for others to follow. So according to the Wall Street Journal, he took an uncommonly active public role in cyber response. He communicated personally with business partners, wrote an open letter about the attack in the midst of their ordeal, held town hall meetings with employees every few days to provide updates. If you have that kind of CEO, if you have that kind of leadership, involve them because it's much better that you can't bury your head in the sand. And as I mentioned earlier, ultimately, this is about authority and about responsibility, and that's their job. So get them involved.
Yes, make them part of that race day prep. Make them part of the tabletop exercise. Get them involved so they know how to handle this as well.
Yep.
All right, Sean, we are right on schedule, which is always where I like to be.
Wow. How'd that happen?
Rarely does that happen. I think we're just to the point where we can begin wrapping these things up. And let's talk about practical steps coming out of this that security leaders can use to build their cyber resilience. And of course, if you have questions, now's the perfect time to drop them in the Q&A.
Great. So we have 3 steps, 3 action items. So recognizing our new reality, we kicked off with that, right? Embrace the paradigm shifts, right? There's change everywhere, and that's not necessarily bad, right? This isn't the fear, uncertainty, and doubt side of it. This is like embracing it and understand that we're here. We're going to end up working with generative AI. We're going to work with AI in a variety of ways that will assist us, right? The tools can be very valuable. They may also be invaluable to the other side, right? To the nefarious actors. We just got to recognize that. So adjust your strategy accordingly. Practice your process. We kicked off, some of the discussion with that as well, that, if we use TTXs, if you use scenarios, if you do some of the lightweight things that can really get your team to proactively think about the changed landscape, you'll be so much better off. So do that. And then automation, right? Using AI to automate. So, I gave you the example of Starlink. There are so many others where if you do things like just go across, your certificates, look at, use AI to do that, use tools, right? Don't have people, right? Your precious security teams, right? Don't increase their cognitive load. So do that with AI and automate, and you get out of so many of the problems. So plan, make your process something that you can understand, and don't change anything on the day of the race. So love that. I'm gonna use that. And if you have if you have an office, you can print this out, put it on your board. It's something that we talk about. If you don't have an office and you're working at your home office, certainly you'll have a refrigerator, and you might even have a magnet. Put it on that. It's a great Japanese proverb, and it speaks to resilience at a very fundamental level. Some of it comes through failure, but a lot of it just means like standing up, doing the next thing. So accordingly. Practice your process. We kicked off some of the discussion with that as well, that if we use TTXs, if you use scenarios, if you do some of the lightweight things that can really get your team to proactively think about the changed landscape, you'll be so much better off. So do that. And then automation, right? Using AI to automate. So I gave you the example of Starlink. There are so many others where if you do things like just go across your certificates, look at, use AI to do that, use tools, right? Don't have people, right? Your precious security teams, right? Don't increase their cognitive load. So do that with AI and automate, and you get out of so many of the problems. So plan, make your process something that you can understand, and don't change anything on the day of the race. So love that. I'm gonna use that. And if you have an office, you can print this out, put it on your board. It's something that we talk about. If you don't have an office and you're working at your home office, certainly you'll have a refrigerator, and you might even have a magnet. Put it on that. It's a great Japanese proverb, and it speaks to resilience at a very fundamental level. Some of it comes through failure, but a lot of it just means like standing up, doing the next thing. So with that,
Awesome.
I think we're on time, Rebecca, which is amazing.
Yes.
Because we practiced and we were a little worried, but we got through all the slides. So I want to hear from the people who are still on the call. I hope we have a little bit of opportunity to do that.
We're no questions yet. We've gotten a couple kudos. So thank you, Sean, so much for walking us through that. We are so lucky to have you here at Red Sift for your expertise on all things cybersecurity, but specifically this process for cyber resilience, how you practically bring that to your life, in your organization has been super